Welcome to a January meeting of the Tuckahoe Seniors, and we're fortunate today to have Michael Fix come and talk to us about Eastchester's fallen heroes. Now, this is also going to be a detective, a sleuthing tale, and he'll tell you about that. But Mr. Fix has lived here since 1999. He's a graduate of Fairfield University. He was chair of the board of the Westchester Red Cross from 2001 to 2004. And I said, were the years important? He said, well, that was the year of 9/11. He's the past president of the Eastchester Rotary Club, and he's past president of the Eastchester Historical Society. So I think you're in for a very interesting session with Michael Fix.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't hear well either, so if you don't, just do this and we'll get going. I want to thank you all for letting me come here. I'm going to be telling you some things, but I also might need your help in doing some work, if you can, at a later point. It's not a quiz, and you're not going to be graded on it, but if you can help me, that's important. Barbara said that I was the past president of the Eastchester Historical Society, and that's where the story begins. After I finished my presidency, the Historical Society said, we're going to give you a title that's going to be called Emeritus. Emeritus means that you can write, which I've always wanted to do. And one of the things that I had an interest in was the young men who died in the wars in the 20th century. World War I, II, Korea, and Vietnam. I would go to the parades, because I think parades are neat, and I'd say, who are you honoring? And some of the guys would say, you know, the guys that died in the war. So I'd say, well, who were those people? And they said, you know, the guys that died in the war. And after repeating the same question and getting the same answer a couple times, I realized that a lot of people don't understand or know who died in the war. So I went to town hall, and I found a sign, and I found that there was a lot of kids that died in World War I, about 7. But after doing some research, I found that there was more. There's more like 12. And when I looked at the World War II list, there was 100, and there's a few more there. We went to Korea, there's about 8, and then we went to Vietnam, and there was 4. Well, Vietnam, there's more in Vietnam than that. There's a whole bunch, and it's just that I don't think anybody who made that list at the time realized the number of kids from Bronxville and Eastchester and Tuckahoe that died. So that list hopefully will be updated. The next thing I decided is, how am I going to do this? And originally I had a photo of each guy with his name underneath it. And I said, you know, that's okay, but if I want people to understand what happened, I have to put a story there. So after 4 or 5 tries, what I have come up with is something that looks like this. Now, this one, this is what he thinks of my talk. This is a World War I fellow. This is John Grogan. And if those of you who have been around town know, there was a post named after John Grogan. John Grogan lived on Cronin's Hill, right behind the Westchester Funeral Home. Now, I wanted to bring Tuckahoe people, and I don't know whether Cronin's Hill is Tuckahoe or Eastchester, but we're going to call it Tuckahoe for the day. So Johnny died in World War I, and he was buried in Europe, but his family wanted to bring him home. And under the rules that General Pershing had set up, Pershing was the man who was the general for the American forces in Europe at the time, said, we'll bring these kids home if they want to come home. And Grogan is buried here in Eastchester, in the town cemetery right up the road here behind the country club. So the family brought him home. He came up on a train into Bronxville. The funeral home picked him up, took him past Immaculate Conception, stopped for a few minutes there, and then went to the cemetery. So here's John Grogan's story. The most, probably the one that people associate with World War I more than anything, is Leroy Gregory. Leroy Gregory is the young fellow who the post is named after on the north end, the American Legion post. You know where Mrs. Green's Market is?
Oh, yes.
Okay, well, right behind there. Originally, the Gregory home was where the market was. And the Gregory family gave the post to the American Legion, and that American Legion originally worked out of the house, and then later on they sold the house to the owners of the property where the market is, and they built their post behind that. Leroy was part of a New York State division that went to Europe, and he and that division fought with the British. There were 2 divisions in World War I that did not fight all together with Pershing. That was one. He died in the Battle of the Somme, a very, very important battle. Leroy, for your information, is buried in the country cemetery in White Plains. His family, the descendants of that family, are the people who run Galloway's Bakery. That's how I found out about Leroy. I found out about Grogan because Grogan's niece lives up in Peekskill. So there's Grogan. Now, there's another situation here in Tuckahoe, and it's the A.C. Jeffers post. Well, A.C. was a Tuckahoe kid. He lived somewhere near where the Marbledale apartments are in Tuckahoe. And he got drafted, and he went to a war in Europe, in World War I. But he didn't die in battle. Does anybody else know what was going on at that period of time in history?
Influenza.
Correct. The Spanish flu. The Spanish flu probably started in one of 3 places. Boston, an army post out in Kansas, but anybody who was a younger person got the flu. Older people didn't get it because they had an immune system that had acquired enough flu in them over their years of life that they were immune to it. So strong young people got it. There was about 4 kids that died in World War I of the flu. AC is one of them. I have never been able to find a photograph of Jeffers. It just doesn't exist as far as I know. On the other hand, I do know that there are letters to his mom, and he sent his, he made his will out, which you have to make when you go into the service, and he made his will out to his mother, who received a fair amount of money. And A.C.'s buried in a cemetery in Hastings on Hudson. not a very distinguishable gravesite, and at some point down the road, I hope we can do something about that. So that's who the post is named after in town. He died in January of 1919. There are other kids who had the flu who died who were on the marker in Town Hall, and I've included them. Obviously, I have not brought all of them because there's 150 photographs or stories to be written. I have about 60 done right now. I don't have them all done, but this is where hopefully you'll be able to help me. If you're a Tuckahoe resident, you may remember this building, and I'm going to tell you the name of it, and I'd like somebody to tell me if they know what it is. The Itch. Everybody knows the Itch, right? Well, there are still guys around town and girls who were in the Itch the day the Pearl Harbor was bombed. And, you know, the owner of the theater came out, he turned the projector off, and he told the children in the theater, because it was a Sunday afternoon about 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, told them what had happened, and then he said, "Go, you know, we're going to recite the Pledge of Allegiance and go home and talk to your mom and dads." And that's the next day, of course, Roosevelt did his talk, you know, the day in infamy. Now, here's one of the kids who died in the Pacific from Sparrow. His name is Raymond Heatherly. There's a lady in town who I was introduced to, Mrs. Quigley. And this is Mrs. Quigley's first cousin. I kind of knew the story a little bit. I didn't know the whole thing. Mrs. Quigley sat down with me and we talked about it. And so that one's done. What happened with this kid was he was on a aircraft carrier in the Pacific, and it was the planes on that aircraft carrier were two-seaters. There was a pilot, and then there was a fellow in the back who would help with the dropping of the bombs or the shooting of the cannons that were on the wings. And Quigley's plane came in, landed on the ship. They taxied it around, and Quigley was standing up on the wing of the plane with his back to the planes coming in, got hit by the plane, lived for about 2 days, and then died. He is buried, not Quigley, excuse me, Heatherly. He is buried at sea. There was a funeral service at sea, and that's what happened to him. Now, I should tell you that F. Scott Fitzgerald, one of the great American authors, said, "Show me a hero, and I'll always show you a tragedy." There's going to be no happy endings here. And I didn't bring Kleenex. What I'm trying to do is tell you stories that, will help you remember. Because in America, we don't remember our dead very well. If you go to Europe, there are cemeteries in England where there's American boys buried, and there are certain families that take care of the certain tombstones or burial sites. We don't seem to do that, and I think it's important. If we're going to remember the lessons of war, we got to remember the faces of war. Eisenhower and Patton and Churchill and Roosevelt and Clark and MacArthur were the generals of the war. But the kids I'm telling you about were the ones who won the war. They were the ones who got their hands dirty, and those are the guys who made it. Okay. Here's another one. This is Ernie Peterson. Ernie Peterson is reputed to be one of the best baseball players that ever came out of Tuckahoe. He had a chance to try out for the Yankees when he came back from the service. Unfortunately, he did not make it. He was involved in the Battle of Salerno in Italy. He was on a transport ship, a ship that would carry cargo, and he was unloading it. There were soldiers that had stormed the beaches in Italy, and Salerno was in the hold taking gas cans that would run the trucks and the jeeps and the tanks and what have you up, and a German missile, about 6 foot long, just came in, hit the ship, and Peterson was in the hold, and that was the end of him. His remains are buried in the Italian-American cemetery in a little bit south of Naples. How did I find him? Well, there's a trustee in town here in Tuckahoe by the name of Claire Gorman. Her father was a dear friend of Peterson, and Claire had information that helped me write the story on him. There were 2 Lamannas who died in World War II. They weren't related, but you know, they both fought. One of the Lamannas, who I didn't bring today, was the first kid from Tuckahoe to die in the service. He was a New York University graduate, and he went down to Georgia to fly, and the plane that he was in crashed in the States, and that was the end of him. He is buried here in town. This young man, that was Joseph Lamanna. This is Anthony Lamanna. Anthony Lamanna kind of got lucky, but didn't get lucky. He was a card player, and around town before the war, he was always in a card game and always a winner. When the war came out, he enlisted. He participated in the battles in Africa, North Africa. From there, he went into Italy. So he saw probably battles in Sicily. He, was in the process of moving up through the bottom of the boot of Italy all the way through Rome. And then he went to England to rest, and then he got into the battle of the invasion of Normandy. He got through that, and he died in the Battle of the Bulge. He is buried in Europe. That one I call, lucky but unlucky. This is a fella. Is that mine? Let it go. So, that's distracting, isn't it? Hold on. So, this is Donald Sparrow. Donald lived in Eastchester, became the class president, and I found a lot of information about him just through talking to people in town. A really nice guy, and Mayor White told me a story about Sparrow. Don Sparrow, in the late 30s and early 40s, you used to have what they call goldfish swallowing contests, where you swallow goldfish. Well, Don Sparrow apparently was the champion in Tuckahoe, among other things. Good guy. Again, he dies in the war, and he's buried overseas. Now, so far I've shown you some from World War I. I've shown you a few from World War II, and I'm going to show you 2 more because I want you to know that I'm working on Tuckahoe, on Korea, and also Vietnam. They're a little easier to find because there's family members still around. There aren't family members from World War II, many left. I'll tell you a story. There was a photographer in Bronxville who came here in 1939 for the New York World's Fair from Poland, stayed here, and then enlisted in the service, and was a photographer for the Army Air Forces. And one day he was in a plane trailing a group of Brazilian pilots going into Italy, and somebody rammed his plane in air, and the plane went down and he died. I found a relative and had the address and was getting ready to call this person, and the day before I called her, she died, and I lost my source. So, it's sad that these things happen, so now I'm back digging again, but I've got another lead as regard that young man, And so we'll see what happens. That kid's name was Karas, K-A-R-A-S. All these names, by the way, are mentioned on the flagpole in the village square, and they're also, most of them are named on the stone outside of Assumption Church. So if you want to check my printing or my spelling, you can go there and do so. This is Joe DiPietro. Joe DiPietro is not a Tuckahoe kid, but it's one of the guys I've done for Korea, and I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Joe. Joe wasn't old enough to go into World War II, and he was a happy-go-lucky guy, and he had a heck of a good smile. And so when Korea came around, Joe enlisted, and he didn't go to Korea. He wound up in Japan in the occupation force. Remember now, we kind of occupied Japan after Hiroshima. And then all of a sudden, the North Koreans started to come down, and they sent 5,000 troops over to Korea as a show of force. That was the quote, show of force, against 500,000 guys. And they all got overrun, and most of them died or were captured, and Joe's one of them. Again, it's a sad story, but that's the way it is. War is not a fun thing. What is accomplished out of war usually is a good thing. Vietnam is the last group I'll go after. I have 3 done so far, and there's more that they're not on the list. This is Howard Bruckner. And if any of you go to the Eastchester Tuckahoe Memorial Day Parade, very often toward the end of the parade you'll see a guy on a flatbed truck with drums banging away all through the parade. And on the side of the truck it says, in memory of Howard Bruckner. Howard was an Eastchester kid. He went to Eastchester High School, but he lived on Alcamont Avenue, which I think may be...
That's Scarsdale. That's Eastchester.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this is the story of Howard. Now, I've left 2 or 3 out that you all know, and I'm going to mention them just for a minute. One of them is Mario Pomponio. Mario was a dear friend of Tony Kuzma, who's a highly decorated veteran in town here, and his is done. I didn't bring it because I figured you knew it, just by, oh yeah, I know you do now. The other one that is getting finished and is a Vietnam kid is Robert Charles Murray. Now Murray is a Vietnam boy, and he he graduated from Fordham, he went to Harvard, and he had his accounting degree from Harvard. He went into Vietnam. He wound up to be a squad leader, and he was in the jungle with his group of men, and one of the kids tripped a wire that would pull a grenade, and Murray knew what was going to go on. That means the whole squad was going to get annihilated. And Murray jumped on the grenade, and the grenade exploded, and Murray died, but the rest of the kids made it. Murray, if you've been reading the paper, you'll know that Harvard tried to figure out, Harvard University, how many guys they have that are Medal of Honor recipients. Hold on a minute. I've got Medal of Honor recipients. There's 14, which is more than any other college in the United States except for West Point and Annapolis. Murray is the only enlisted kid from Harvard that gets the Medal of Honor, and he's one of the only modern kids to get the Medal of Honor. Most of the rest, to me, are ceremonial given. They're generals, a couple of other Civil War who may have done something, but some of these other guys certainly weren't in battle like Murray was, or lost his life like Murray did. So here we are. There's 50 done. There's about 20 more on the drawing boards that I'm missing stuff. A photograph, a good story, an interview with a family member. And what I'm going to do is read these, and then I'll pass the list out to you all, which has my name, my mailing address, and my phone number, my home phone number. And if you know of a family or know of one of these kids, I really would appreciate it if you'd call me, or I'll stay here for a little while this afternoon and maybe we can get something started. So here they are. These are primarily World War II men. Gene V. DeRochus, or maybe DeRochus, I'm not sure which. I think he was an accordion player before he got drafted in World War II. James Lawless. James was in Manila when he died. I have an okay photo and I have an okay story, but I'd like a little more. He's a graduate of Immaculate Conception Grammar School, and that's about all I know at this point. William Martin, Dennis Murphy, Joseph Solano. Joseph Solano may have had a 7 or 8 year old kid when he went into service and died. I would love to meet the family. Ennio J. Valerio, V-A-L-E-R-I-O. I suspect somebody knows him. These others are a little new to me. The last name is Interoni, I-N-T-E-R-O-I-N-N-I. N. Marcelletti, M-A-R-C-E-L-L-E-T-T-I. M. Ciano, S-I-A-N-O. N. Taglio, T-A-G-L-I-O. And finally from World War I, a fellow by the name of William Costanzo, C-O-S-T-A-N-Z-O, not Costanza, different. William was in school here. He lived in Tuckahoe. He was here 3 years, and then his family moved down around where Fort Dix is. I can't get a photograph of him. He died in Italy, and he was part of the 82nd Airborne, and I really would like to find a photograph of this kid. This kid saw a lot of battles. My address is here on the bottom. My home address is here. My phone number is here. And if anybody could help me, these are help-wanted people that I think could help us complete the project. My guess is the project's going to last another year. Currently, the plaques are at the American Legion Post at Leroy Gregory Post on the north end. There's 40 of them there. And if you can help me find some of these guys, I really would be very grateful. Somebody has already provided me a name for Salvatore, which was another kid that died in World War II. And I thank you for that. And so, if there's any more, please, I'm around, and you can either call Barbara or just call me on the phone. That's all I want to know, and I'll come to visit you as quick as I can. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing some of you down the road. Here, Heinzinger is done. Heinzinger was a great athlete, and he went down in the same ship as the Sullivan kids did, which was the Juno. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
We have a Gold Star mother here that lost a son in Korea.
Wow.
Oh, Vietnam, I'm sorry.
What's your name, please?
His name was James Samuels.
Oh, I know of him. I just haven't. I'd love to talk to you before we go home here. Please, that would be wonderful. I really would appreciate that. Hey, I got lucky here. Was James called Pee Wee Samuels?
Yes, exactly.
I know him. Okay, I want to talk to you. Don't go away.
Yeah, but that's Vic. She's a gold, this is a gold star. Yeah.
Pee Wee Samuels. Any other questions? Okay, I'll stay for a little bit. I've been reminded that for those people who are watching this on the television, if you want to call, you're more than welcome to, and my name is Mike Fix, F-I-X, and my phone number in town is 395-3247. And if I'm not there, there's an answering machine, and I'll call you back as quick as I can. But just leave your telephone number and name, and the person you're calling about. I'd really like to know more. Thank you again. Thank you.